It was just days before, in that stark hospital room, when Larry's voice faltered on the phone. He muttered something about figuring it out later.
But his words felt hollow.
Disconnected from any sense of truth. I could hear the unraveling, the loss of his grip on the life he thought he controlled. The man I had once adored, the one I had believed I couldn't live without, was no longer the person he had been. His power over me was crumbling, piece by piece. I ended the call, feeling a wave of liberation wash over me. He was no longer part of my world. I was finally free. I lay back on the cold hospital bed, the rhythmic beep of the machines the only sound in the room, breaking the silence that had become strangely comforting. In that quiet, I realized how much peace I felt.
All the years of manipulation,
the emotional neglect, the constant striving to be the perfect wife, it was all gone. The woman who had quietly bent to Larry's will, who had lived in the shadow of his demands, was no longer there. She had vanished, replaced by someone new, someone strong, someone who would no longer tolerate disrespect, someone who would no longer settle for a life that had never truly been mine. Days passed, and with each one, I felt a growing sense of excitement.
My family's inheritance was no longer just a safety net.
A fallback, it had become my lifeline, a ticket to freedom, to a life of authenticity. I had never sought wealth or luxury, but now, with the land and assets under my name, I saw it as the key to building a life I could finally call my own. I had financial independence far beyond anything Larry had ever imagined. But beneath the satisfaction, I couldn't deny the small thrill that bubbled up inside me. Larry had always been so certain of himself, so smug in his assumptions about me. He had seen me as nothing more than a simple housewife, a background figure in his life. But now, as the reality of our divorce began to sink in, I felt the power shift. I was no longer the woman he could control. I was someone to be reckoned with. The weekend came and went quietly, a brief respite before the storm of finality. By Monday, the divorce papers were officially processed, and Larry's frantic calls began. His anger was evident, his voice frantic with desperation.
But I refused to pick up.
Each call felt like a reminder of how far we had come from the life we had once shared. But still, his voice managed to pierce through my resolve. His anger, his frustration, was a reflection of his own panic. The world he had so carefully constructed was crumbling around him, and he was scrambling to hold it all together. Eventually, there was one last call. His voice, usually so confident, was strained, almost pleading. "Natalie," he said, his words desperate, "we need to talk. This isn't how things are supposed to be." I could almost hear the panic in his voice, as if it had finally dawned on him, too late, that he was losing everything. But I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of a conversation that would change nothing. The woman he had discarded, the one he had assumed would always be there waiting for him, was no longer the person I was. That woman had vanished. "I think it's a little too late for that, Larry," I said, my voice calm, steady, unyielding. "You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I could hear him searching for words, but nothing came. He had no response. And then, with a final click, I hung up. The next few months felt like a whirlwind. There were papers to sign, legal matters to attend to, and small, quiet victories to savor. The properties, the money, the things Larry had once thought he was entitled to, they would soon be mine. I took steps to ensure that my family's inheritance remained untouched, that it would be protected from his grasp. When the dust finally settled, I stood tall. I had fought not only for my financial security but for my peace of mind. I had fought for my dignity, for a life that was truly my own, the life I had always imagined, one filled with freedom, happiness, and independence, was finally within reach. Larry's hastiness, his reckless decisions, had led to his downfall. He had underestimated me. He had believed I would always be the obedient wife, the one who would accept whatever he dished out. But he had forgotten one thing. He had underestimated my strength. In the quiet solitude of my hospital bed, I had made a decision. I was done being invisible. I would no longer live in the shadows of his life. This was just the beginning, and with a final breath of relief, I whispered to myself, "This is my time. The future was mine to shape.
And no one could take that from me."
The hospital room was cold and sterile, but Larry's presence added a layer of warmth, unwanted and stifling. Just days before, as I lay in my hospital bed recovering from the accident, I couldn't help but reflect on how deeply absurd his expectations had become. Larry, the man who once promised to stand by me, now seemed to think that I was still responsible for his every need. It was almost comical how he equated my inability to perform household chores due to my hospitalization with neglect. It was a twisted logic, one that, if presented in court, would likely leave even the most lenient judge in disbelief. Yet, Larry clung to his distorted view of reality, especially now that he had Brenda by his side. He seemed to think that with her, he had no further need for me. When he called, I reminded him sharply that his affair with Brenda was, in fact, cheating, a betrayal that, despite all his bluster, he refused to acknowledge. His denial only made the situation more infuriating. We were stuck in a loop of circular arguments, and I knew that if I didn't end it now, the same toxic patterns would persist. So, with a sense of finality, I cut the conversation short, telling him that from now on, all communication should go through our lawyers. I hung up and, to my surprise, the calls didn't stop. Larry's fury erupted in a flurry of texts and phone calls, each more desperate than the last, but I ignored him, standing firm in my decision to reclaim control of my life. The next morning, my peace was shattered by another barrage of calls. I rolled my eyes as I pressed the call button, expecting another tantrum from Larry. Sure enough, his voice rang out over the line, his complaints about not being able to access money from what he assumed was a joint account filling the room. I was quick to clarify that he was trying to access my personal account, my account that was now off limits to him. The protective measures I had put in place were already proving to be wise. Before my hospitalization, I had contacted the bank to temporarily freeze any withdrawals from my accounts, knowing full well that Larry might try to tap into my savings while I was incapacitated.
Why can't I access the account?
He demanded, his voice rising in anger. What's going on? I kept my tone calm and steady. Because it's my account, Larry, and we're in the process of divorcing. I'm no longer obligated to support you. His confusion was almost comical. He demanded that I authorize a withdrawal immediately, failing to see the gross impropriety of trying to access money from an account belonging to someone he was actively divorcing. I reminded him that we were strangers now and that I owed him nothing. It was a far cry from the woman who had catered to his every whim for over a decade. Larry, now more furious than ever, insisted that I send him money. He even suggested that I owed him compensation for not keeping up with my household duties. I reminded him, once again, that such matters would be dealt with through our lawyers. He threatened to visit me in the hospital. I wasn't the least bit intimidated. With a deep breath, I told him that he could do as he wished, but I would not tolerate his presence in my room. I had already notified the nursing staff to only allow visits from my parents, ensuring that Larry couldn't simply waltz in uninvited. He tried, of course, but was stopped at the nurse's station. Undeterred, he resorted to flooding my phone with calls and messages, which I saved as evidence for future reference. After what felt like an eternity of silence, my phone buzzed with an unexpected visitor, Denise, a long-lost friend from my past. We had drifted apart when I married Larry, but I had always cherished our shared love of food and culinary adventures. Denise had heard about my accident and was concerned, so she decided to visit. But her arrival brought more than just comforting words. Denise dropped a bombshell. Brenda, the woman Larry was now so enamored with, was actually Denise's niece. She had overheard Brenda's plans to marry a much older man and, when Denise saw a photo of the supposed fiancé, she realized it was none other than my husband, Larry. The shock hit me hard, but Denise's next words were even more shocking. She had already informed her sister about Brenda's involvement with Larry and was contemplating demanding compensation from Brenda for the distress her actions had caused me. She assured me that her loyalty remained with me, and she wanted to help me address the situation head-on. The following day, I left the hospital with Denise by my side, and we headed to a private dining room where a confrontation had been arranged. To my surprise, Larry and Brenda were already there, enjoying an expensive meal like nothing had changed. Larry, always the opportunist, reminded me to bring money to cover their meal. His audacity took me aback, but I quickly regained my composure and refused. You're not my responsibility anymore. You can pay for your own lunch, I told him firmly. With that, my lawyer and I took our seats at the table. The time for games was over. We came prepared, with a folder full of legal documents and evidence that would expose Larry's deceit. I laid the evidence on the table, photographs and testimonies from Denise, including images of Larry and Brenda together and, more damningly, photos of Brenda entering a hotel with another man. As I watched Larry's face twist with shock and guilt, Denise made her entrance, confirming her role in gathering the evidence. Brenda looked utterly stunned to see her aunt involved, and Denise, ever loyal to me, made it clear that while she was deeply disappointed in Brenda, she still wanted to maintain our friendship. However, she wasn't going to let her niece off the hook. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Brenda, clearly flustered, blurted out that she was pregnant. Larry's eyes widened, but the truth quickly unraveled. Denise, ever the skeptic, pointed out that Brenda showed no signs of pregnancy. Under pressure, Brenda admitted that the pregnancy was a lie, a manipulation to get Larry to commit. She confessed that she had targeted older, affluent men, and Larry had simply been her latest victim. Larry, now fully exposed, was left speechless. His lies had caught up with him, and the weight of his actions was too much for him to bear. Denise, showing no mercy, led Brenda away, promising a more formal apology later. Alone with me, Larry tried to salvage something, anything, of our broken relationship. He begged for a fresh start, even tried to guilt-trip me with my lack of recent work experience, suggesting I couldn't manage without him. But I was done. I revealed to him, with quiet confidence, that I was financially independent. I had inherited a substantial fortune, around $10 million, completely separate from anything tied to our marriage. The revelation hit Larry like a freight train. The man who thought he could walk away from our marriage with everything in hand was left grasping at air. His world had collapsed. From that moment on, Larry's downward spiral was swift. Brenda, under pressure from her family, deposited a sum of money into my account as compensation. Her mother ensured she worked to make amends, but the damage was done. Larry's own family distanced themselves from him, and he lost his job. In the end, he was forced to take on construction work to pay off his debts. As for me, the divorce was finalized, the assets were divided fairly, and I chose to donate a portion of the money to charity. I relocated to the countryside to start fresh, far from the toxic remnants of my marriage. Denise and I rekindled our friendship, and we made plans for a new chapter in our lives, one filled with food, travel, and laughter. We dreamed of culinary tours and spontaneous trips, celebrating the freedom we had found in each other's company. Now, with my life reset and the future full of promise, I can finally live authentically, surrounded by those who truly cared. No more manipulation, no more lies, just the freedom to be myself. And in the quiet moments, when I reflect on how far I've come, I smile. This is my life now, and it's only just begun.